My name is Bob Nash. I'm a consultant with a company called Higher Digital and recently retired from the California Community College system and helping them, CVC, the California Virtual Campus, was hired uh, by the state chancellor's office to assist the CBE collaborative in helping these 8 pilot colleges create brand new direct assessment competency-based education programs. And they are in their 4th year, I believe, right, team? In creating these, and many are going to be launching this fall. So we have a lot to share with you about the potential and the challenges of creating these programs for our students. I will now hand it off to our team members, and they will introduce themselves. Kate Ashby.
Hi, Kate Ashby. I teach early childhood education at Shasta College, and I'm also coincidentally the SLO co-coordinator here on campus. So I have my foot in both worlds, and we've been working with this project for about 4 years, constructing and deconstructing. We're excited to share it with you.
And Randy Beach.
Randy.
He's muted. There he is. You can see him. Randy is from Southwestern College in the San Diego area. There he is.
Can you hear me? Okay,
yes.
Thank you. I was furiously typing. Please unmute me, please. Good morning.
Right.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Good morning, everybody. My name is Randy Beach. I'm English faculty at Southwestern College in San Diego. Also the curriculum chair there, credit for prior learning coordinator, as well as the faculty co-lead on our CBE project. Also, I'm serving the California Community College's Chancellor's Office as a visiting professor for direct assessment. So it's wonderful to be here, to be talking about this project with so many great colleagues from our collaborative.
And Nikki Maddox.
Nikki Maddox. I actually teach animal science at Merced College, but I was the original Ag Innovation Director and part of the original group that did the F3 Ag Tech CBE, and the first one to get our school through the process to get those classes approved.
Yeah, that's a special example in our mix here. So we'll be back to you many times, Nikki. Buffy Tanner.
Hello, everybody. I'm Buffy Tanner from Shasta College. I'm the Director of Innovation, which means that I get to work on large-scale across campus projects that focus on adult learners and removing barriers for adult learners to access our college. So my 2 primary projects right now are credit for prior learning and competency-based education, but also my office oversees our adult learner completion programs, the Accelerated College Education Program, or ACE, for completing associate's degrees, and BOLD, bachelor's through online and local degrees, because we do not have a 4-year public institution within commuting distance for our students.
You reminded me, Buffy, that we should discuss CPL, credit for prior learning, versus CBE, and how they do and do not work together. So if I forget, let me know. Sue Stanley is running late. She already asked me to introduce her. She is the interim director of online learning at Coastline College and heavily involved in their CBE project. She'll be here soon. All right, team, let's start. Exactly what is competency-based education in our context of higher education, and direct assessment CBE? How do they differ? Let me just start with Randy.
Sure, Bob. Thank you. So with Southwestern College, this was actually a long conversation we've had to have, because there is so much confusion around what exactly is CBE and why is it different from what we do now. Because when we define CBE, we like to refer to it as a skills-based curriculum, a curriculum that focuses on outcomes and what students are able to do, the knowledge, skills, abilities, behaviors that make up the knowledge they need to do to perform whatever tasks are ahead of them. And because that skills-based focus is a bit foreign to some of our general education faculty, we really had to spend a lot of time talking about that. The difference between the direct assessment component even blows up the conversation even more, makes it more complicated, because the idea that students' demonstration of those skills is the currency that they would use to move forward in the program, as opposed to spending time sitting in a classroom for a certain number of weeks in order to satisfy the, in my opinion, arbitrary definition of learning that makes up the Carnegie unit. That was something that's very new to our college. So I'll turn it over to any of my colleagues to maybe provide a more concise definition, but that's certainly the conversation we've had and the way we've looked at CBE and direct assessment.
Yeah, and maybe Kate can.
Yeah,
take
so I
this
just
up.
pulled up this slide. We got this from South Texas College, I think. I think they did a really good job explaining how CBE is different from traditional courses. And when you talk about direct assessment, really what you're adding to that, as opposed to credit-based CBE, you're adding to that a recognition that students come in with a different level of experience. Some of them can go more quickly, not just because of the time factor, but because of their prior knowledge. So they don't have to complete every learning opportunity, every practice activity, every assessment, formative assessment. They can move through that material based on the holes in their knowledge. So the goal is to get to that competence, that mastery, so then they can move on to the next one.
Yeah, complete flexibility and disengagement from the Carnegie unit. Now we know CBE is offered by several colleges now, especially the nonprofit privates. Western Governors is an example of, we'll call it traditional competency-based education. Colleges like UMass Global and Southern New Hampshire do more of the direct assessment. Anyone else from our team like to speak to that, the definition of CBE and direct assessment? All right, let me move on. So why do this? What are the potential benefits? And I should say Sue Stanley is now in the room from Coastline. Sue, are you prepared to address the benefits of CBE for both students and colleges? She might be muted.
Bob, I'll take a crack at it while
Yeah,
Sue's
thank
getting
you, Buffy.
unmuted. Sure. So we've learned so much at Shasta College since we developed our associate degree completion program, our ACE program, back in 2016 about working with adult learners, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And the biggest piece is recognizing that adult learners don't come to us as empty vessels. And really, no student comes to us as an empty vessel. They all come with their life experiences. They all come with their prior learning. But truly, adult learners come to us with so many skills and abilities and knowledge that they've gained through their life experiences, through their work experiences, and more. And recognizing that adult learners are very interested in learning. They truly want to learn and thoroughly understand the content of what they're learning. But at the same time, they are also very interested in how long is this going to take and how much am I going to pay for this? Time is of the essence for adult learners. And so the flexibility around time with competency-based education, I think, is going to be such a watershed for these students, the ability for them to move at their own pace. We've been using the terminology walk, jog, run a lot. Everybody learns information at a different pace, and you see this all the time with your colleagues. Some people get it, the light bulb goes off really quickly, and other people have to sit and contemplate information a bit more. But allowing people to move at their own pace and that differentiated instruction for people. K through 12 has been working with differentiated instruction for so long. What does each individual student need? And it's really time for that to come into higher education.
Thank you. Sue, I see your mic is open now.
Yes, I'm actually breathing. I'm not panting anymore. I was running from one meeting to another, so thank you for your patience with me. The only thing that I would add to what Buffy said is simply that there's a kind of an innate sense of value placed on the learners in CBE, that they may not be in the same place, but that a normal or a traditional student coming into community college might be. but that we recognize as institutions that what they bring is of a high value, and that they can demonstrate that knowledge and kind of step into a place where they are almost expert in their own learning, but also find places where they can grow. So, you know, the walk, run, what is it, walk, jog, run. If they are in a place where they need to learn something, for example, maybe they've been in a career where they haven't had a lot of technological experience, they can slow down as they go through those courses, or in a career where they've had a ton of technological background, say working as an admin or something where they know Office 365, our degree is in management. So that's part of what our course curriculum is, or the competencies that are covered in our program. So then that would go really fast. That would be super easy. And then it might slow down to take in more when they get to courses that cover something that they haven't learned or competencies that they're not familiar with. And CBE allows students that flexibility and honors them in that way.
Nikki, so we could hear the benefit for students. For colleges, they're not replacing their current programs with CBE, they're adding to them. So they're adding another vehicle to help students succeed and therefore help colleges succeed with enrollments. But Nikki, that also employers benefit by this as well. Can you describe your employer set and how they're benefiting from your program?
Sure. First, I like to piggyback. For what we found is our students are in the workforce, and that ability, the flexibility goes even beyond, you know, it's just being able to do it, but like finding time. Some of our students are seasonal workers, so they're moving around. So it allows us the ability to work with them. And then sometimes during the season when they're off, they can move through those modules quite quickly. Sometimes we might not see them, but our success teams then are, you know, getting a hold of them, making sure everything's good. So we have that great communication with them. So I think that's another flexibility about that. And also in CTE, I think we have a different type of vocabulary and verbiage. So for them, a lot of our students will come in and in the manufacturing module, they'll fly through it. But what we're finding is in our computer literacy module, it's a more hand in hand. So sometimes, like we talk about, the moving through is great, but we also have the ability to work with them, especially if there's English as a second language. That's really helped us to be able to work with them in those modules that they don't do so well. As far as answering the question about partnerships, we were really lucky because we started with industry in the room. We started with the F3, we had all of the professors that were going to write their curriculum in the room with the actually industry leaders. And we talked about what competencies do you want in your employee? And so we built it kind of on backwards. We started with finding the competencies that our industry needed, and then started developing curriculum based around those competencies. So we have a very, very close connection with the industry. We wrote competencies, then came back, met with them again. They said, oh, that's not the right one. We worked back. So we really had a chance to make sure that when our students are done, that they have the competencies that our industry needs.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm seeing some questions pop up in chat. And Amy, I see your question. We're going to deal with that with the very next question. But I see Marty asking this. And let me just read it out loud. Why would we not assume that this is needed, wanted, beneficial for all students? And what biases are inherent in how we collectively frame this concept of adult learners? Feels maybe privileged to assume that youth are not necessarily come to us with work experience. That's a tough one. Randy, you want to grapple with that?
I can't, forgive me, I can't see the chat, so I'll try. I think we in education do often make assumptions about our students, and in a lot of the general education work that I've done, I find sometimes that the concept of faculty-centered instruction is still kind of alive and kicking. And the mindset shift of working with adult learners as the focus of these programs helps us realize just what some of my colleagues have said. their life experiences, work experiences, just the fact that they've been living and breathing and being in the real world for a while really brings to the educational experience just so much richness of life that they can move through these programs and demonstrate at a much different pace. Something I was going to mention a moment ago as well, I think might be related to that conversation. One thing we've discovered at Southwestern is that by building a program based on those discipline competencies in our program, for example, is automotive technology, we are now able to contextualize the general education study within that discipline to make that general education study far more relevant to our adult learners. And that's something when you read about the literature around adult learners, they really want to see the relevance of what they're doing to their ultimate goals. So as an example, our English faculty are creating assessments for competencies that measure a student's ability to communicate through writing and to think critically and logically and express that through writing. But now those students are writing about automotive technology. They're writing about things that are germane to their overall goals. While if I'm teaching an English class with 30 students and I give them an assignment on something that they really have no interest in, but hey, it's fun for me to read, then that kind of faculty-centric approach to it doesn't serve students, and it certainly will tune out or cause adult learners to tune out. But with the CBE approach, we can really flip that script a bit.
I think, Marty, I agree with your comment that 18-year-old adult learners do come with some experience. Sometimes when we say adult learners, we conflate that with non-traditional learners, 25 and older, who might have a slightly different situation. I know these 8 pilot colleges are expecting all sorts of learners, but probably, and I'll hand this off to Buffy, they expect more of the older adult learner than the younger. But Buffy, can you address?
Yes. So I would say, so one of the elements about CBE, that flexibility and that student-driven element, student-determined pace element, is one of the things I think that this will likely attract more adult learners than traditional learners, but it's definitely not exclusionary. We do intend to start our pilot program with 25 students who are currently working in the field of early childhood education. But eventually, this could certainly open up to people who are not yet employed in the field, to people who are younger, et cetera. Again, that idea of that very, what it takes to be successful in competency-based education is a lot of internal motivation and a lot of self-discipline. And being able to set your own deadlines, work backwards from them, which students who have just come out of high school, they're still learning how to do that in a lot of cases. And they're in their learning process to do that. They have had a lot of support from their teachers in high school who have set deadlines. And, say there's a big research paper due, the instructor is going to say, okay, by this date, I need an outline. By this date, I need you to tell me 5 sources that you're going to use. By this date, I need you to flesh out your thesis statement, and so on and so forth. So the instructor is really helping them break down what they need to do and by when they need to do it. In CBE, students are still very much going to have access to faculty to help them facilitate learning the content, but in terms of deciding when they want to finish that and what they need to do to get to that point is going to be very self-determined. So I'm not saying that 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds can't do this. I just think it's going to be a little bit less
Less directed,
less direct. Yeah.
or self-directed then.
I just think it's going to be less appealing maybe to your typical average person just coming out of high school.
All right. Sue, I see your hand. I'll hand it to you. Also, can you address the idea of contextual learning in the GE areas in your program that Randy referred to? You're muted. Let me see if I can unmute you. Where are you? Well, as I
There
do
we
that,
go. We got
okay.
it. There's a couple of things I'd like to address. One of them is highly personal, and the other has to do with specifically the basic skills instruction and the work that students will be doing in our CBE program. From a highly personal point of view, I have 3 children, all adult. One of them is currently a student, a sophomore at Saddleback College, and the other 2 all took courses at the community college in high school for different reasons. The traditional high school program did not work for 2 of my 3 children. And so, not that CBE would have been the right course for them, but I don't think that we have no restrictions on who can enroll. They have to qualify. So, a student who clearly has 0 work experience, who has no proof of their ability to accomplish tasks on their own, except that they've come right out of a traditional high school, might cause admissions to hesitate to recommend CBE for them, or the counseling group here to recommend CBE for them. But for some students who are emancipated, who have already been working full-time, even in high school, who have done high school in a non-traditional way, I don't think there are limitations on what CBE could provide for them. And certainly the way Coastline is handling it, there are students who might be chronologically young, who reflect a recent graduate from high school, but whose life experience is not that. So I wouldn't want to in any way limit a student's ability to do that. That said, one of the things that's happening within our courses, especially those courses that are early in the scaffolding, that cover basic skills, most of the faculty that's creating the courses are setting up as required assignments drafts. So, for example, they do have to submit that outline. They do and get feedback on that. They do have to, do the initial spreadsheet that shows what they are demonstrating that skill, that they know how to use it, and have an opportunity for feedback and an opportunity to revise that work. So that is built into the courses, recognizing that students, regardless of their work experience, may not know how to cite something with MLA or ALA. And we are also building into each of the courses the kind of support that students will need, whether that's Math Center or Writing Center, whatever that support is, it's built in. They cannot, in a lot of our courses, advance until they have demonstrated knowledge. Even at the module level, they're held up until they can show, I know how to do this. And then they're free to move on.
Very good. And breaking up big projects like that makes a lot of sense in the era of AI as well, for various reasons. Let me move on, because we have a number of questions left. What is the difference between a student learning outcome and a competency? Because when I see well-written outcome, well-written competency, they look very similar. Kate, can I throw that to you?
Yeah, sure. Well, we're lucky in ECE in California. Those of you in the audience who know early childhood education, we are all aligned across the state. All of our course outlines of record, or many of them, have the same content, same outline, same student learning outcomes. So what we did, we wanted to build on that, building our program. So what we did was we took those student learning outcome assessments that are aligned across the state and said, how could this be a demonstration of skill and knowledge? And it really helped us having that framework in early childhood to break it down. So that deconstruction process where you pull everything apart and put it back together, SLOs are a big part of that. SLOs should reflect the skills and knowledge a student can demonstrate as a result of engaging in the content of the course, the learning objectives, the learning activities, whatever it is, reading, videos, whatever it might be, and the formative assessments. So the goal is to get them to that outcome, right? That's the goal of the course. And lots of courses have 1, some have more. We boiled it down to 3. So we have 3 big learning statements that are part of each traditional 3-unit class, and we've taken those apart and put them back together as competency statements. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, I can demonstrate X, Y, or Z. And it works really, really well that way. They're really not that different, in my opinion. I think as faculty, that's where our expertise comes in. What will a student need to know and be able to do? to show competency in this particular area, but again, it's got to be sequential. It has to be linear. So what do they need to do to move on to the next one as well? It has to stack.
Very good. Randy.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Kate. This, as a former SLO coordinator from many years ago, who can, now my stock joke is always, I can sleep with the lights off at night, finally. This keeps coming up time and time again because faculty will ask me, well, isn't this just student learning outcomes? And I would say not exactly, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But the first thing I wanted to say was, if we get hung up on these semantics about these terms, then some of the conversations we need to have about the curriculum kind of get stuck. And if I would give advice, the advice would be to come to an agreement on what your terms mean. And then as long as we understand those and share those definitions of the terms, like student learning outcome, like competency, then we're good. We can work and we can build the curriculum, and we can all build something that's going to be effective for students. The way that I've talked about the difference between competencies and SLOs and course objectives or learning objectives as well, to try and create some kind of framework to think about the curriculum, is that your competency is the synthesis of all of the outcomes that you can identify that students are able to do after they've completed this learning journey. The objectives, the learning objectives, are the building blocks, the pieces of that puzzle that help students prepare to demonstrate each student learning outcome. And your student learning outcomes together form the overall competence definition. That's the way I've described it. And again, you may have a different opinion, or you may see some different ways to look at it, and that's fine. As long as we all come to an agreement on what those terms mean, we can do this work. And the last thing I'll say is the example I like to give is the example of baking a cake. I can bake a cake is a competency statement, right? My SLOs, I can crack an egg, I can measure flour, I can measure sugar. And then the objectives I have are, I know what sugar is, I know what flour is, I know what eggs do. That's maybe simplistic, but when we're having conversations about some very heady pedagogical and andragogical concepts that many faculty quite honestly aren't trained in as much as they're trained in their disciplines, they're not really trained in what I lovingly call edge-speak sometimes. That allows for more that allows for a conversation that doesn't stop us from moving forward, but allows us a place to start.
Very good. And some of you are assisted by industry standards, statewide certification standards in developing your competencies. Let's move on to general program development and curriculum development in particular. The curriculum committee is heavily involved, especially in the beginning of these programs. I'd like to throw this out to any of you who might respond to compare the traditional and competency-based education curriculum development. And now we can probably get to Amy's question. Our courses developed with both learning outcomes and competency outcomes, and this thing we hear, the program map. I guess, Buffy, you were going to address that question.
I can, unless Nikki wants to start.
Yeah, Nikki as well.
You're my guest, Buffy. I'll go after you.
Okay. So one of the things that we wanted to share was our curriculum grid, and how we basically deconstructed, and I say we, I am not a faculty member, but I've been working really closely alongside our ECE faculty through this process. So I get to pretend that I play one on TV. And definitely, Kate, jump in anytime you want. But in developing the competencies, as Kate mentioned, because the early childhood education curriculum is standardized across the state, they really took a look at what are the competencies behind each traditional course, and then bundled those competencies and align them into the breakdown of the traditional course to the individual competencies. So while this looks like a nice little neat, tidy spreadsheet, the amount of work and thought that went on behind it to look at the learning experiences, the student learning outcomes, the ultimate competencies, the teacher performance expectations, the teacher performance assessments, all of that led to something pretty tidy. Kate, you want to add anything else?
I think I do want to add that for programs considering doing this, we were lucky. We really were fortunate in that we could build on a standardized. We're not just standardized across the state and community colleges. Our industry is standardized across the state as well. So we knew, for example, that we needed to have a level 1 with 12 units, that those 12 units had to encompass particular skills and knowledge. And so we didn't have to deconstruct the way some other programs do to convert expectations or student learning outcomes into skills or competencies. It was a rather straightforward process. I'm not going to say it wasn't messy, and we still continue to have conversations almost every day about, are we doing this right? Does this make the most sense? Could there be a better way to do it? So we've been building this now for 4 years, and we've had so many conversations. I think that's been the beauty of it, though. Don't be afraid of having those conversations, as Randy mentioned. Don't get stuck in the language. Think about what the student needs to know and be able to do to move on to the next competency and to move into a career or the profession, whatever it is they're going to be using these skills for later.
And these program maps are extremely important here in California. They may be in other states as well, but our Title V regulations for the California Community College system require that these CBE programs articulate to traditional programs in such a way that as students achieve competencies, that translates to equivalent credit in the traditional program, which will appear on their final transcript, which we'll get to in a moment. Nikki, let's talk about your program and curriculum development, because it's kind of special because you're collaborating, Merced, with several colleges in that San Joaquin Valley, right?
Yes, so there are 7 colleges now, and we all of the professors were from all of those colleges. So all of the colleges were represented sitting in that room with the industry, and a majority of those partners were from all of the areas that we're talking about. So that was a beautiful thing. I think we were lucky because we had an industry that really needs this. And so they were very willing to sit with us and talk with us what that might look like. I will be honest with you. It is a challenge when you have industry saying, we want this, and then the teacher and the professor is going, oh gosh, well, how do we do that, right? How do we make that happen with SLOs and with, curriculum? How do we make that happen? What we figured out was, if an industry said, we'll do like our writing literacy class. So we have a reading and writing literacy class. Okay, that seems a huge task, right? How do we do that in a module or in, a few units? And so then the thought was, okay, well, what does that look like to you? Well, they have to be able to read a manual on how to, directions, a manual on how to run this piece of equipment. Okay, well, that now we can take. That's a great place to start. So then we accumulate manuals, and then that was part of their module in terms of learning it. So we tried to link realia, what they're really going to do in the industry, and it also helped our students who already know that, right? They do know the verbiage, they know that already. So it really helped us both ways. But it was a challenge to really kind of take what the industry wants and, as a teacher, make it make sense to our campus, to our curriculum committee, how that works. And so I think that was the biggest challenge for us.
Thank you. Randy, you wanted to speak to this?
Sure. Thanks again. Gosh, I could talk an hour on this because as curriculum chair at Southwestern, helping the faculty understand how this curriculum is developed and how it's different than how we develop traditional curriculum has been both a challenge and an incredibly rich professional experience to talk about curriculum in this way, because it allows us as faculty to go back to the beginning of why we offer this education in the first place, whatever the discipline is, whatever the content is. When we have in the 8 College Collaborative been very supported and had some wonderful experiences with the Competency-Based Education Network. And from that group, we've learned different curricular approaches. You've heard the word deconstruction thrown around. There's a deconstruction, reconstruction approach where you take existing curriculum, you mine it, you interrogate it for what are the competencies that students will be able to demonstrate after completing that. But then there's also the framework approach, which is what many of us have been describing here, the CAP standards that the ECE faculty use. Here for us with the automotive program, we have the Automotive Services Excellence standards that are required for us to maintain our licensure accreditation with that group. And that framework provided us the ability just to open the manual and say, well, here are all our competencies lined out right in front of us. So that curriculum development that is so tied to industry, which then is so relevant to the career or even academic goals that students have, that becomes really apparent, really transparent too, when we make that part of the curriculum and we explain that and make that very relevant to students. On the general education side, there are frameworks for general education that we can look to help define what it means to have completed general education and to be competent in all of the important life thinking, communicating skills that are embedded within our general education experience. The trick there on the general education curriculum build is to get outside of specific disciplines as being the end of the general education experience and look more at the skills that I can demonstrate after completing a general education experience. Communication skills, critical thinking skills, etc. That is more challenging because as an automotive technology program, I can see you do a brake job. I can watch you change the oil in a car. When it comes to general education, it's a little harder for me to see you think critically. You know, maybe your eyebrows are furrowed and you're thinking really hard. That's harder to measure. So faculty really have to think about how students apply the skills they learn through a general education curriculum and then create assessments that would measure that. And that's why in CBE, you work backward from the competencies that you've defined and have made transparent to your students. You build that summative assessment that is as authentic as you can make it, because the application of the skills is what's important and not always learning for the sake of learning for learners who are very motivated and who are very goal focused and who are seeing this education as a way to improve their lives, improve their economic mobility. All the things that we sometimes forget is why our students are coming to college in the first place. And the last thing I'll say, I'll stop talking so much. This conversation around curriculum is where we get to that very important question of, is CBE, direct assessment CBE, a modality or is it curriculum? And again, I try to keep it simple when talking to faculty, and maybe I make draw some lines where they don't have to be, but it's all about communication at this point. For me, the CBE, the competency-based education part, this is curriculum. We're writing a new curriculum that expresses transparent standards and expectations and how this learning is relevant for students. The direct assessment part is our modality. This is our method of instruction. This is our framework for the learner's journey through all of the content we've created in order to be able to demonstrate that competency. And any curricular conversation, I think, has to start with some clear definitions of what is modality and what is actually curriculum.
So Randy, clarification then, the curriculum committee, among other things, will produce an approved course outline of record. Are there separate course outlines of record for these CBE courses?
two parts there. Absolutely, I believe your curriculum committee should be involved, and so therefore they need to be trained. They need to understand all of the things that we're all learning and have been, in the collaborative for the past 4 years. Now, whether you approach it as a separate course outline or you approach it as an addendum to an outline that demonstrates the difference of the direct assessment modality, similar to what we might do with distance for correspondence education, I really think that's a local decision based on how your community, your culture at your college wants to approach CBE. At Southwestern, we have created something that looks a whole lot like a course outline, but that's not the only way to go. So I would be cautious if I were to say you need to write a course outline for your CBE program because it's curriculum. I don't know if I want to go that far.
Okay. Also, I should note, Amy asked if anyone has an example of course syllabus from our pilot colleges. If any of you have an example, you can upload it here for the team. Enrique, you have a comment?
I have been asked in the private for Randy or Bob, do we have currently the infrastructure to acquire CBE? And if so, what does the Title V regulations say about CBE for the protection of curriculum?
Yeah, we have that in a future question. I don't mind skipping ahead to that. Let me kick this to Buffy because we're talking about creating the systems by which we create and support CBE within each institution. So I'm putting a pin in the approval process, Buffy.
So
talk about the infrastructure that supports CBE.
absolutely. So there is Title V language that is specific to CBE, Enrique, to answer that question in California. So the infrastructure to create this is really interesting because 100% of our infrastructure at the California Community College system is based on time and the traditional term. And one of the flexibilities about competency-based education is that if you wanted to, you could set it up so that students could literally work year-round. And so one of the first decisions that needs to be made is your campus going to utilize your standard traditional terms, fall, spring, summer, or fall, winter, spring, summer, or are you going to create a unique calendar specifically for CBE? And within the 8 colleges, we've decided different things. At Shasta College, we decided to go ahead and keep with our traditional terms, but create as much flexibility within those terms and even a little bit outside of the terms for the students. And some of our sister colleges have decided to create a new academic calendar specifically for CBE. And there are pros and cons of both of those decisions. And then you have to think about financial aid. Well, if your financial aid is going to operate under your traditional terms, that does make things a little bit simpler. If it's going to operate with your new academic calendar, that gets a little bit more complicated. You also have different ways of packaging and delivering financial aid to students. You can use traditional methods of packaging and awarding aid. You can use what's called modules, awarding financial aid by modules. And there's also a system called subscription, where a student would pay for, so let's say that a campus decided to have 2 6-month terms for their competency-based education program, similar to Western Governors University. A student could pay for a 6-month term, take as many competencies as they want during that term, and financial aid would be based on the assumption that the student is going to complete at least 12 units of competencies during that 6-month term, award financial aid accordingly. And then what if the student does or does not complete those 12 units during that particular term? I am not going to go into the weeds any more than that because it gets super weedy. But then you also have the element of registration. Are you going to manually register students in your competencies? Are you going to allow students to register themselves? The transcripts, Title V for CBE states that not only do we have the traditional transcript where the students' competencies are crosswalked to traditional courses and appear on the traditional transcript as regular early childhood education 17, principles and practices, 3 units with a B, but you also have to create a separate transcript, a competency transcript. And here's a
Call a
mock-up
dual transcript.
called a dual transcript. And this is the mock-up of what we're thinking that ours is going to look like, where you list the individual competencies that the student has completed. And not only do you list the department and number of the competency, but the title, the unit value, the evaluative mark, because you don't get A's, B's, C's, D's, or F's in competency-based education. You either master the content or you have mastery plus. Mastery is evaluated at an 80% minimum. So that student has achieved competency mastery over 80% of the content. Mastery plus is 90% of the content. So there's a higher threshold for an expectation for the student.
Yeah, it's equivalent to B or A, right, Buffy?
Exactly.
80%, 90.
And then you also list on that dual transcript, what does it mean that the student has competency in the history of ECE? And so you phrase that in terms of, I can describe historical and current issues, or student can, depending on your preference. So so the nuts and bolts of this is extensive. And again, we're constantly trying to make CBE work in our system, which nothing has been set up for CBE. And so we're trying to figure out, like, what do we need to break and then fix? What can we plug into? What new technology do we need to access so that we can do all this, both from a curricular standpoint and from a logistic student services standpoint? I won't kid you, it's a lot. And we're hoping that, and we're planning that from our learning experience, we will definitely be sharing with anybody else who wants to develop CBE. That's part of being in the pilot. And hopefully we will save you some of the pain that we have gone through.
Yeah. Thank you, Buffy. I'll get right to Randy in a minute. But as Buffy said, and I think posted in chat, the CBEN organization is very helpful in guiding colleges that want to create competency-based education programs. And our pilot is creating a handbook of lessons learned and guidance, both in administrative procedures and curriculum and recommendations for curriculum and technology as well, which CVC was hired to comment on. And you're right, Buffy, some of our systems, such as the ERP, Colleague, Banner, PeopleSoft, were set up for that term-based system where you have courses and terms. And now in DACBE, we don't have courses per se. We've got competencies in a program, but per our Title V regulations, we have to relate that back to equivalent courses. Randy.
Sure. And I thank you, Buffy, for saying that, because that gives me a door to kind of bash the Carnegie unit again a little bit more. Because at the underlying all of those systems, those term-based systems that we rely on so heavily, is that pesky time-based measure of learning that we're so entrenched in higher education that it really, for us, part of the conversation begins with a reimagining or an imagining of the world without it. Can we deliver education not based on belly button and seat time, but rather on what the true value of education is, which is demonstrated in those competencies? And a shout out to Calbright, the college within our California community college system that is purely competency based, and have that ability to develop the curriculum from that perspective, rather than kind of retrofitting our curriculum to a world without the Carnegie unit. And that's what many of the colleges in the collaborative have been challenged with doing. So while it's a necessity still that we rely on that unit for the kinds of systems that Buffy was describing, the crosswalk between competencies and credit units is still a part of the Department of Education approval process. The accreditation process for our accreditor at the California colleges expects that you're able to demonstrate, or rather to explain your method for how you equate or make equivalent or show the equivalence of the competencies to credit unit values. As an example, one of our automotive tech courses that has 8 competencies is a 4-unit class. So each one of those competencies has been measured out to be half a unit, right? That sounds simplistic, but what is underlying all of that? Because when you actually sit down and stare at that crosswalk and you interrogate that crosswalk, you ask yourself, well, isn't it kind of arbitrary to say that these skills are actually equal to this amount of time? Because we're all different. I have 2 kids. One of them is amazing at guitar. The other one can't carry a tune in a bucket. Or they're different learners. They learn at different paces, different styles. They have different strengths. And the Carnegie unit just tries to make us all one size fits all. And I'll stop bashing it for now.
Thank you for mentioning Calbright. They have been involved in CBE for quite a while now. They are our 116th college in the California Community College system. But they're a bit special in that they don't charge. They offer free, I guess non-credit we'd call it, at the moment. And so they didn't have to go through all the approvals with Department of Education and our accreditation agencies. Buffy, let me have you summarize the complex road that colleges have to follow to approve their DA-CBE programs so their students can get federal financial aid.
Hold on to your hats. Okay. So in the world of financial aid, I was a former financial aid director for a hot minute. In the world of financial aid, your campus is approved is eligible for, has determined that they are eligible for and approved by the Department of Education to award federal financial aid, which then in turn gives students access also to California student aid, such as the Cal Grant. Under our traditional normal classes at the community college level, any associate's degree that we create or modify is automatically approved under our overall eligibility. Any certificate program that's 16 units and above, approved by the Chancellor's office, has to go through a process called an e-app, electronic application, that typically campuses submit once or maybe twice a year to the Department of Education. They list, these are our new certificates, here are the details about them, or we changed this certificate, here are the details. Reviewed by the Department of Education, takes 4, sometimes 5 months for that e-app to be fully processed. And then presto, your certificate is also eligible for federal financial aid. In the world of competency-based education, if you do credit-based competency-based education, then there's nothing extra special that you have to do with federal financial aid. It's rolled into your normal processes. For direct assessment, competency-based education, the Department of Education wants a 20-page narrative about about the academic side and the policy side of your program. And they also want another 5-page narrative about how you're going to deliver financial aid for direct assessment competency-based education. That goes into the Department of Education, and it has been our experience that to get that part reviewed has been taking 8 to 10 months easily. With a lot of iterative back and forth. Oh, okay, you gave us this 25-page report. Now I'm going to give you another full page of single-spaced questions, answer all of those. That's another 20 pages of responses to you, and maybe even a third set of questions and responses. And then after that is approved, then they say, okay, now you need to submit your normal e-app, electronic application through financial aid. And that's true for any level of program, certificate, associate's degree, or if you happen to have a bachelor's degree as well. So the whole process for Department of Education approval can take, well, Coastline submitted theirs way back in November of 23, and they are not yet fully approved. So it is quite a process. And right now, I'm sure you're probably thinking, the Department of Education probably has other things on their mind, and this may not be a priority. And that is probably very true. So.
Don't lose sight of the benefits, but it does take some time to set up. And then after Department of Ed approval, your local accreditation agency will require approval for at least your first program, right, Randy?
Oh, actually, I forgot. That's your local accreditor approval is part of that Department of Education approval. So you really have to do that first, and then that feeds into everything else.
Randy?
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's a good opportunity with what Buffy's description of the process. Because Southwestern, we're very close. We just had a meeting with the department last week. But the overall focus of what that application is doing is justifying giving students financial aid for your program. So the academic components that Buffy described, they all lead up to that. But the bottom line is they want to know if the money that's going into students' hands and being spent on this program is actually giving them some kind of return, and is therefore a good use of the taxpayers' money. Which is the point I wanted to make, was involving your financial aid office from the very first day that you decide to embark upon this is so critical, because all of the systems that they will need in order to track student progress, in order to award student aid in the first place, in order to track the obligations that institutions have when students have to repay money. All of that is going to help the program have longevity and be sustainable and can grow and can expand into other areas. We've been fortunate within the collaborative that the Chancellor's office, some of the folks there, Billy Wagner, Aaron Larson, have been working to help our colleges have access to software from a company called Regent that will help us do some of that. We're still in early stages of exploring how that might work. But the point is that part is so difficult in direct assessment. It's such a challenge that you want to go in with your eyes wide open that it's going to be a challenge. It's not going to be it's not going to be the exact same process you use with other students. Although what we have developed for Southwestern and our intended approach will look a lot like what we do. For a traditional student, there are very specific places where we have to make adjustments for the direct assessment program. And the number of starts that you decide on in your program will impact that tremendously as well. We are a standard academic calendar with 3 terms that are roughly about the same. And we're going to have 3 start dates for our program, student. And that looks a whole lot like what we do already. And that was the point, so that we didn't shock everyone into going, what are you doing? Our more ambitious cousin, Coastline, is going to go for 11 starts, basically 1 start every month. And that's going to require significant tracking for student completion of competencies, for academic progress, for financial aid. We hope to grow up to be that one day as well, but we know we got to start somewhere. And so we're going to start with a model that looks a lot like more what we do now.
Yeah, as much as possible, open entry, open exit, although there are some limitations. Kate?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Randy said, that we decided to go with 5 entry points over the year. And that's really based on what we've already been doing with 8-week sessions. So the 2 semesters split into 2, and then summer is an extra one. So we have 5 entry points, and we're going to stick to those.
Okay,
For
thank
CBE.
you.